today and for tomorrow, but our staff who've all worked so very hard on this program, our planning committee, Mark Johnson in our office, Barbara Giles, she's the person you see outside to fill out your little slips for the door prizes, Joe Zapata, and from the VA, Elizabeth Packer, Veronica Salazar, and Tressa Carr. And in the back of the room, we have a stream team. This conference and tomorrow's conference are being streamed live on the internet to other folks who are listening in who couldn't be here. And that team's led by Bob Merrill, and back there with him as well are John Munoz and Kelvin Buchanan. So thanks to them. And do you want to do, okay. So
they've slipped out. Got it. Well, we're getting the go-ahead from Joe, so we'll go ahead and move forward. The next presentation is a great one to follow the CIT team. Carol, I know you know something about mental illness.
I told you not to tell anybody.
No, I meant would you introduce our next presenter?
Oh, yes, I knew that. Okay, Judge Kazen is an associate probate judge. He presides over the mental health civil commitment docket. Which serves folks from 52 South and Central Texas counties. He helped develop and administers the involuntary outpatient program that has been recognized as a national model, but most impressively, he drafted and helped pass new laws that bring dignity and hope to persons with mental illness. Judge Kazen.
But I don't need a microphone. But, all right, there we go. They're recording it. I see. There we go. We got it now. Actually, I should do it this way. I'm a good Laredo boy, and the way you test a mic is la música, de Gladys Knight y los Pips. En vivo. For those of you, first of all, let me ask, let me get a sense of who's in the audience. I know some people went for a bathroom break, and that's okay to come on in. Don't worry about coming in through this. Are all of you or most of you from San Antonio? I would imagine you are. How many of you have heard me speak on this subject before? Anyone? A few of you. So it's going to be a little bit of a rehash for some of you. I'm going to talk a little bit about me, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the process, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the future. Now, the reason this is called Shifting Sands is really a quite innocuous reason. They called me and said, you know, we need a mental health courts component to it. And I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? You want me to talk about outpatient? Yeah, sure. We really want you to talk about the mental health component for courts. Okay, well, you want me to talk about the criminal side? No, we really want you to talk about the mental health components of the court system. Well, do you want me to talk about the civil competency or the civil? I mean, we went on, and we realized, I made the joke, it shouldn't be shifting sands, it should be quicksand. Because nobody really knows what a mental health court does. Nobody really truly knows or gets the entire concept across the board what a judge does. Now, I'm going to make another note. I know because I was standing back there that this is being tape recorded for some future CEU, CLE, and the like. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time to the guy in the very back who's holding the video, because every time I move, and I move a lot, you're going to have to move that thing. All right. For those of you who do know me, you know that I can somewhat be a little loud and a little obnoxious on occasion, and I apologize for that. And I will often hear people say so politely, oh, he's impassioned. So I apologize ahead of time if I come on a little too strong, but I really am impassioned about this. And I really do want to share with you a little knowledge about the system, about the courts, and where it intersects with what you all do in medicine and in healthcare and as providers and lawyers. So next, let me ask, how many of you here are actually physicians? Anyone? We got quite a few. Excellent. How many of you here are caseworkers? Okay, a few. How many of you here are nurses, LVNs, RNs, and the like? Outstanding. I've got a little comment for you all in just a second. All right. Who am I? I am Associate Judge Oscar Kazen. It's a relatively newly created position in the probate courts. They created an assistant judge, so to speak, to help the judges in the mental health arena. And they've pretty much consolidated all of that side of it, the probate side, the civil mental health side, all the things you all are used to when we talk about commitments, underneath me. So at the end of a long tunnel, when someone goes down this road to involuntary commitment, they typically see me. And it's because of this fact that I've come to appreciate just every aspect of what these people go through when they become ill. And the associate judgeship isn't really even a full judgeship. You know, how did I get here? And that's important. I mean, it really is. I used to be an elected judge. I used to be the guy who could put people in jail. You know, I handled over 125 jury trials, unreversed. I did over 30,000 dispositions. Before that, I was a criminal defense attorney. I have done everything from murder to traffic tickets. Well, I haven't done them. I've represented them. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be here in this color suit. But, you know, and I did over 3,000 criminal cases. I mean, that's a lot of criminal cases. So along the way, I ran for judge. I became a judge. And my whole focus in life, being this criminal geek, criminal guru, criminal practitioner, court practitioner anyway, you know, it was about criminal justice. And when you ran into somebody who was mentally ill, it was always in the context of how do I get them off the crime? How do I get them out? As a secondary assessment, I would think, well, what's the best thing to do for him? See, because you're trained as a lawyer to be a sword or the shield, but you are a sword and a shield that is wielded at the direction of the client. You don't have the luxury of saying, well, I don't think you're doing that the right way. If that's what they want, that's what they do, and you're supposed to do it to the best of your ability as long as it's ethically done. So, from traffic ticket to murder cases, for people who were mentally ill, the context of what I did was how do I get them to where they want to be? The question never crossed my mind, what's the best thing for him? And when I became a criminal court judge, an entirely different world. Although I'm not trying to get someone to get away with something or defend them to the best of my ability. And mind you, when I say get away with something, I bear no shame in that. And very few lawyers do. You don't blame the deer when the hunter misses them. All right? And it's the deer's right to dodge that bullet. That's how it works. So when you become a judge, however, things change. And you are now there to ensure that justice is done, whether it be that an individual leave or is subject to sanction or jail. It's supposed to be done so that you can walk away as a judge and know that was the right verdict. Whatever verdict came of it, I was a fair and impartial referee, and I ensured that justice was done. And that's the progression. But again, in very few circumstances, criminal court judges don't stop and go, what's the best thing for this mentally ill person? So I was an elected official. There's, in fact, 2 Judge Kazens in Bexar County. There's a Judge Phil Kazen, and there's a Judge Oscar Kazen. We're both known for being somewhat of hams, I guess. Every time we give speeches, we are fond of saying, you may not learn anything, but you'll laugh, you'll cry, it'll be better than cats, I promise you. You know, Phil is my older cousin, and he's a district court judge. He does the murder, rape, arson, kidnappings, the like. I was a criminal court county judge, DWIs, assaults, thefts. And unfortunately for me, my whole life, Phil will always be my older cousin. He was 8 months older than me. He was 8 months old. He'll be 8 months older than me the day I die. And unfortunately for me, that means I have lived in this shadow my whole life. And in our family, that sucks. I mean, he's the beautiful Marsha Brady. I'm the forgotten Jan Brady. He drove the first car. He had the first girlfriend. He got to college first. He became a judge first. He won his last election. Darn you. All right? And I just have always followed in his footsteps. In fact, even in the commercials, many people, if you're from Texas, are familiar with the Kazen name. There was a chick Kazen who was the congressman here for many, many years. And down in South Texas, where I grew up, I mean, I'm preceded by a whole bunch of people in the law. You know, there's Jimmy Kazen, who was a district court judge, and Phil Kazen Sr., who was a DA and a judge, and then George Kazen, who's the federal judge, and on and on and on. I'm the last guy that actually went into public service. And as a result, and unfortunately, wouldn't you know it, Philip, when he runs for judge, has these really beautiful commercials. So, you know, Kazen, real tough justice. And he kind of does this thing where he looks in the camera and says, "Love me?" Which unfortunately left me with Kazen, rhymes with raisin. It's kind of tough. Now, why am I talking about this? For this reason. Here's the circle. So at the last election, I had won, and I'd been a judge for a while. I was the guy that wasn't supposed to lose. In fact, I didn't even draw an opponent from the other side. Favorability ratings through the roof. I was doing great. I'd never been reversed, never had a single complaint filed. I mean, I was riding high. I thought, man, I'm just as good as Philip, damn it. You know, and I'm going to get there. And out of nowhere, this young lady, relatively out of law school, recently out of law school, wonderful young lady. She did a good job campaigning, and she beat me. She beat me by 6 votes. And think about that. Don't ever tell me your vote doesn't count. Because if 6 of you had voted, I'd be hugging you right now. I can hug 6 people in a closet. That's how close that election was. But everything happens for a reason. I used to be the guy who would ask, God, why me? And I was often told, remember that for every door God closes, he'll open another one. I would always retort, yeah, but why are mine trapdoors? About 3 or 4 months after the election, Judge Spencer, who's chiefly in charge of mental health, and who, by the way, is my mentor, and when I grow up, I want to be just like her. All right. How many of you don't know Polly Jackson Spencer? Because this is videotaped, Polly, this is for you. Everybody. Somewhere along the way, she was in the middle of this really heavy trial. It was the King, you know, if you're going to be a probate judge, the last case you want to be in front of is the King Ranch. I mean, that's a will. Okay, that's a will trial from Hades. And it went on for months and months. They had the need for a judge at the time, and I'm mentioning this also because it'll come into play as I speak later. When I was a criminal court judge, I was one of the very few judges who, there were about 3 of us, who really took the time to take this long training. We flew all over the country, and we learned how to do what are now called therapeutic courts and restorative justice. We were the very first drug courts, even in this area. And we had learned that the court with its own power, with its gavel, can't do as much for an individual as the court with a doctor by his side, a clinician by his side, a lawyer by his side, and the patient by his side working together. That somewhere along the way between sanctions and treatment, there's a point where clarity becomes an option, more than an option, a reality. See, I mean, it's kind of like if you can get somebody who's addicted to drugs, for example, and not just throw away the book, but kind of make it so that, and forgive my language, it becomes a pain in the butt. I sanction you, and I sanction you, and I sanction you. And along the way, treatment is standing next to you going, and I'm giving you an option, and I'm giving you insight, and the doctor's saying, and I'll help you through this. Somewhere along the way, it turns out that if you can keep a person sober long enough, either because it just becomes too much trouble to keep going in and out of jail for short term, they get sober. It turns out, and every study now shows this, and we've no wonders the doctors can tell you, and many of you already know, we know more about the human mind now than we've known for our lifetimes in the last 5 years because of MRIs and CAT scans and the like, and we now know that addiction can be cured. Well, not cured, but it can be addressed. Because we know that for the seriously addicted, the things we take for granted. A few seconds ago when I said, Marsha, 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 there's a little smile amongst you. The Marsha Brady, Jan Brady thing. It was funny. That type of joy, that subtle laughter, the smell of baked bread in the morning, of bacon that your grandmother has permeated through the house, walking from a hot room into a cold room, from a cold room into a hot day. Those things we take for granted and joy go away for the seriously addicted. And the mind only experiences joy in one part of the brain. It's amazing, the electrical firing imprints of happiness and joy. For us, you can see the little wires go everywhere, the little lightning bolts head everywhere in our mind. But for the seriously addicted, it lights up in one spot. And it lights up usually when the receptors, because they've been trained to do this, are on drugs. So it turns out that if we do these therapeutic courts and we start to work with people together and we get them to the point where just because it's become a pain in the butt, if anything at all, we can keep you sober for about a year, the mind rewires. Let me rephrase that. The mind works again. And if you take the same picture of that same mind walking out from a hot room to a cold day and from a cold day to a hot room and smelling bread, it's firing just like it used to. And now the chances of long-term sobriety for that individual are 80%. Can you imagine that? And we've been studying these darn things for 10 years now. They remain at 80 and 90%. It's amazing. When judges realized that you can't just spank someone to sobriety, and when caseworkers and doctors realized, there's room here for a little bit of a stick and carrot approach, together we made a difference. All right, so that's what I used to do. I was one of the drug court judges. After I had lost the election, Judge Spencer, they were looking for someone to fill this role as a mental health judge, somebody that they could, it's a pretty serious component, and it was growing and growing. It's grown even more in the last 5 or 6 years since I've been doing this. So they were looking for someone. I was actually the second choice. And I don't know how it happened. This time I didn't walk through a trap door. I walked through this glorious door that changed me as a person and as a judge. So this is the part of the speech that I want to talk to you personally about, how it personally changes you. And I think you already know this if you're in this field. You know, that first time I sat and went to the San Antonio State Hospital, mind you, in the back of my head, I used to be a full-fledged judge. This is going to be a no-brainer. And the first time I sat in that courtroom and I looked at a 10-year-old child at the end of this long table in a room that's been blanked out so you can't hear outside, and the windows have been covered and soundproof. And they sit at this really beat-up old table with an old chair that nobody wants to sit in at the end of the table. And it's kind of a mock courtroom. It doesn't have the grandeur of all the oak and of the big courtrooms. And I sat there and I thought, I can do this. And he, 10-year-old, looks up and says, I have no reason to live. I want to die. It's as though somebody had reached in my lungs and pulled every bit of oxygen out of me. I couldn't believe it. And then right after that 10-year-old came a 12-year-old, and then another 10-year-old, and then a 16-year-old, and then an 89-year-old, and then somebody who could have been my brother, and then someone who could have been my sister, and someone who I knew was somebody's sister that I knew. And at the end of the day, I walked away a changed person. Because from that moment on, I realized what you already know, and that what I teach and which I teach every time I give one of these speeches. The difference between criminal law and what we do on this side with mental illness is that there is no choice. Let me explain that. I know there's some issues with regards to sanity and competence, and I'm going to get to those in a few minutes. But I want to get to the heart of what we do. See, when I was a criminal court judge, I could look at you and say, you stole powdered baby food. You stole powdered baby food. You stole a car. You stole a car. You stole a gun. You picked up a gun. You know, once you get past whether you did it or not, it's easy to be a criminal court judge. It's about why you did it. You stole the powdered baby food to feed your kids. I get that. You wanted to cut your meth with it. You stole the car because you had to get to work and you were afraid you were going to lose the only job you'd ever gotten in a year. You stole the car because you were taking it to a chop shop. You picked up the gun to defend your wife. You picked up the gun to rob a bank. See the difference? It's about what you did versus why you did it, for the most part. And what's common to all of that? It's a choice. For whatever reason, good or bad, you chose to steal the baby food. You chose to take that food. You chose to take the gun and the car and the gun and the car. You chose to do it. And as I sat there at the basement of that courtroom and looked at these people, and still to this day do, I promised myself I would never forget this. They have no choice. It chooses them like a dark creature coming out of a closet in the middle of the night. And because of that, every time I get a class of nurses that comes through, I tell them, you know, you're not going to remember much from having observed us here today, but I hope you remember one thing. They didn't choose it. And somewhere about 3 o'clock in the morning, one of these people is going to get in your face. After some doctor who thinks they own the world, or, no insult. But there is laughter every time I make that line. Or somebody with a clipboard counting pens, or some long day at home. One of these people is going to get in your face. And if they could just remember one thing, it's not their choice. It might get them past that night. And it might give them the one thing that makes us all share one thing in common, this goal to help people. It might give them the one thing that we need each and every day, patience. Because if this is our profession, doctor, lawyers, clinicians, and the like, caseworkers, patience is our blood. It's more than a virtue. It's what we survive on. Because if we don't have it, we won't be long for this world or that job. Do we agree? So, the next thing I try to tell them, in that it's not their choice, the second thing that just hit me with a ton of bricks, that could be me. I mean, as you go past the 8, 10, 12, 13, 15, 16, 98, 77-year-old, as you get past the cases, you start looking at the faces coming in one after another, and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, somebody's mother. It starts to dawn on you. Somebody's father. Somebody's sister, somebody's husband, somebody's wife, my kid, my wife, who could it? Wow. And then you finally realize, it could be me. The average onset for schizophrenia, and there's some debate on it, but 17 to 30-something. That's a hell of a range for schizophrenia. All of a sudden, I've got people sitting in front of me who yesterday were sitting at a board of directors meeting, or were an attorney, or were up on a wire hanging, electricity, or have had mental illness their whole life. It can be anyone, anywhere, anytime. We see that, don't we? So we know it's out there. Some studies indicate that I think it's 1 in 10 Americans have some form of mental illness, even more. I think there's one that says 3 in 10. All right, think about that. In this room, good figure, 10 of you will have some mental health issue this year. 4 of you will have a serious mental health issue this year. Anyone, anywhere, anytime. And it's like a huge emotional bomb, because when it goes off, it doesn't just affect them. And you know this because you've seen it. It affects their mom and their dad and their family, and I get calls every day. What am I going to do? So it's personal, and it's personal for all of us. So I think I wanted to share that with you, the first parts of these speeches that I give with regards to, how the mental health system works and what the big picture is in the law. I want to get and start off with why we're doing this. I never want to forget that. Do we all agree? And it's a lot easier than me getting up here and going,
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Section 5714 of the Health and Safety Code indicates that you shall file your order of protective custody no later than 48 hours.
You don't learn anything from that. We don't share anything from that. Judge Spencer, last thing I'm going to do on the emotional side of this, Judge Spencer, when she first hired me, she's brilliant in how she does things. She handed me, has anybody read the book Crazy? If you haven't, read it. It's a father's experience of going through his first mental illness episode with his son and all the shortcomings of the system and how it failed. It's amazing to read, Crazy. But the very first part of the book includes this father's first experience in getting a hold of a judge and trying to get down to the courtroom, kind of the same kind of hearings we have, and the judge just didn't have time for him. And you know why the judge didn't have time to hear or listen or get through this? He wanted to get through all his hearings because the cafeteria at the state hospital closed at 12 and he couldn't get his free lunch. Yeah. And when Judge Spencer gave me that book, she looked at me and she said, read this. If you're going to I'm going to hire you. You're going to do this. But before you do anything, read this. And just remember one thing. Don't be that judge. Amazing. Isn't she brilliant? One more time, because she's my boss. Nothing in Bexar County happens without her. Nothing has happened without her. Nothing will happen without her. We all agree, and we're lucky to have her. And I'm lucky to be here for her. All right, so mental health and the law. What do most of us think of when we think of mental health? I mean, automatically about half the room probably understands that there's this involuntary commitment process. The rest of us automatically assume it has to do with criminal cases, or, as the two officers were here, arrests. Two different worlds that are unfortunately treated at the same facility, the San Antonio State Hospitals or the state hospital system. So let me kind of break it out for you. If you're mentally ill, there are two things that are going to occur to you, okay? You are either going to have broken the law, and you're going to go down the criminal chain, or you will not have broken the law, and the issue is mental illness, and you will go down the civil chain. The one we mostly think of when we're hearing it and talking about it over a beer somewhere, it's the criminal side. It's the guy who says, I'm insane, I can't be held for trial. That's television. You know how few times we ever even deal with insanity at a trial? If ever? So if someone breaks the law, there are two, on the criminal side, there are two things that have to be ascertained. Was he insane at the time of the offense? You know, very few people actually go through an insanity type of assessment. Very few people actually ever found insane at the time of the offense. Really what they ask, criminal, insanity, this way, what they ask is, are you competent to stand trial? Because if you're going to stand trial in this country, you have to at least be able to tell your lawyer, yeah, it was a gun I was holding, not a banana. Yes, I understand I'm being charged with robbery. No, that's not the King of France up there in a black robe. Okay? You have to be able for, and let me make the definition brief, to understand the nature of the charges against you, the proceedings around you, and you have to be able to help your lawyer. That's competence. You have to be competent to stand trial so that they can, make you healthy so they can convict you. It really doesn't have to do with whether or not you're acute, whether or not you're ill, although they're often one and the same. So what they do on the criminal side is they will assess that you are incompetent to stand trial. Or some lawyer has come and talked to someone and said, uh-oh, he's not there, something's not right. He files a motion and request for determination of competence. And some doctor will come, or psychologist will come and check him over and say, no, he's not competent. And then the Code of Criminal Procedure, it's like the Quran versus the Bible, two different texts altogether, all talking about the same thing. All right? The Code of Criminal Procedure says, well, you've got to send them to a facility to be restored, or put them on an outpatient program to be restored, but we can't try them until they understand what they're charged with, why they were charged with it, what's going on at the proceeding, and if they can help their lawyer during the defense. That's the criminal side. Right? Competence is something that's determined by studying the individual and those aspects. Let me give you a little brief and funny story here when I was a criminal court judge. All right, how many people here are familiar with Star Trek? Yay, all right. If you're really familiar with Star Trek, who can tell me what the color of the command shirt is? Captain Kirk always wore a red. I think it was red, wasn't it? All right. I don't know. I'm not that much of a Trekkie, but I'm going to pretend to be to make this funny. All right. Who here can remember what the color of the security forces are? I think that one is blue, if I'm not mistaken. That's one of those colors. So anyway, I think I remember the color being blue, but it may be switched. For the sake of this funny story, blue. So I'm sitting on the bench, and I get this guy comes up, and if anybody knows anything about Star Trek, they've gone through different generations. There was this Deep Space Nine. It was a spin-off from Star Trek, where they had a whole category of race called the Bajorans, and they wore all this jewelry and stuff. So I'm sitting there, and I call case number 555-332, shoplifting. This guy walks up, and he's in full Star Trek regalia. And he stands there, and I'm looking at him, and innocently, I'm thinking, people can be odd, that's okay. And I look at him and I say, wow, and he's wearing blue, the color of security. By the way, if you've ever watched every episode of Star Trek, somebody has to die. And it's usually the guy who doesn't have any lines and is wearing blue. It's the security guy in the background. He always dies. So he's the cannon fodder for every one of these episodes. So this guy comes up to the bench with his lawyer, and I make the unfortunate joke of, I see you're wearing the color blue for security, the unfortunate uniform of the cannon fodder. And he looks me in the eye and goes, sir, I am deeply disappointed in you. Those people died for noble and great purposes. At which time the lawyer said, Judge, can I ask for a motion in competency? Which we did. That's not really the funny part of this story. I call my cousin Phil to tell him what happened. Yeah, I had this guy come up in a Star Trek uniform and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And finally, I had to grant, a motion in competency. And he says, like, the uniform didn't give you a tip? So, anyway, it's about competency. It's about being able to prepare yourself for trial. So that's that side of it, all right? The other side of it is civil. That's the side that people don't typically even think about, but it's the one that affects most of us. These are the individuals who have never broken the law and are mentally ill. And I got to tell you, most people who wind up in the system have never broken the law, ever. But it's that little intersection when they get acute that an officer has to decide what to do that often puts them down the criminal path, even though they really haven't broken the law. That's what the two officers before me were talking about. I'm privileged enough to be part of that training with CIT and at the academy. If you can teach them early enough to divert and recognize what is mental illness versus what is a true crime, you can divert them away from that horrible system down here. So on the criminal court side, you send them down the criminal side, one of the laws that we changed, for example, and Judge Spencer, came to me one day, Judge Spencer came to me one day and said, I want you to figure it out for us. And I said, yeah, sure, not a problem. He said, write a law, and here's what I want to fix. And thanks to her, we had individuals who, for example, were charged with criminal trespass, failing to ID, kicking over a pot on the Riverwalk during their acute crisis. Now, unlike the civil commitments, on the criminal commitments, what did I say? You have to be competent to stand trial. That could take months. And the waiting period for one of those beds during those times was 6 months. We had people that were going to jail for offenses where if I myself had gone down to the Riverwalk and said, I don't like that pot, I am completely sane, I'm kicking it over and breaking it. Please take me to jail, I'm guilty, I want to go to jail. I would be out of jail within a week, maybe 2, after good time credit, at most. Even if I did it, even if I wanted to go to jail. But if I was mentally ill and I wasn't competent, I would go to jail, sit in jail for months, then they would take me off to one of these maximum security facilities for the criminally insane, where they would try to restore my competence, and I would disappear for months and years at a time for kicking a pot. So we were successful in the last legislative session. We drafted a law, and we worked together with a senator from Fort Worth. And now, if an individual who's mentally ill and has a misdemeanor of this nature winds up in jail, he can't stay in jail any longer than the maximum period of that punishment. And the judge can also give him the same good time credit to eliminate that case early on, instead of wasting a year of your life for breaking a pot. It's those kind of things that we do on the criminal side that make a difference. Here's another law that we wrote. Did you know that when you're incompetent, they can compel medication, they can give you pills, they can restore your competence once you were at the forensics unit? But if you weren't at the forensics unit where they restored your competence, you were sitting in jail for 6 months, where the law didn't allow you to get medicated. We had people, and forgive me for the story, but it's true, we had people pulling their eyeballs out. That's inhumane. It's insanity, the true definition of insanity. So we wrote a law, and we got together, and we passed it. Now you can provide that competence treatment, that therapy, while they're at the jail until they're waiting to go. And it turns out that because we can, many of them stabilize enough that they can go on an outpatient competency restoration or go to trial without ever even hitting the forensics units. When we come together as individuals and look to treating people humanely and doing the simple fixes, you'd be surprised what we can do. It's amazing. On the civil side, if I am ill, we start with the premise that in Texas, You can be as ill as you wish as long as you're not hurting anybody or hurting yourself. Just that simple. These officers received a call to the corner of Main and Dolorosa for a short, fat judge named Oscar Kazen. It's not fat, it's power. Jumping up and down, yelling, "I am Napoleon, king of the world." All right? Well, that's an average day in New York. It is. You know, if I'm not hurting anybody or hurting myself, I as a citizen should not be deprived of liberty, period. And the officers will talk to them and try to get them to get some help, but they're looking to see whether the individual has become a danger to self or others. That's what triggers the civil side. Once you become a danger to self or others and you're mentally ill, now what I do kicks in. So, first and foremost, if a person is dangerously ill, and when I say dangerous, I mean danger to self or others, the first options occur. Either a police officer is going to encounter you and do what's called an emergency detention to take you to a hospital. A guardian is going to take you to jail, or forgive me, to a hospital, because they can for assessment and do an application for emergency detention. Or a family member is going to come to somebody like me and say, "Judge, please issue a mental health warrant on my son. He's in the house. He's hoarding shotguns. He thinks it's the Civil War." All right? And that's a true story. So I would execute a warrant. Whether the officer goes and picks him up on a warrant, a guardian goes and takes him to the hospital, a police officer detains him and takes him to a hospital, or he just winds up at a hospital. Some people just walk in. The hospital shall temporarily admit that person for 12 hours. Period. They've got to take them from that point. The clock starts ticking the minute they're detained. And within that 12 hours, a doctor has to assess the individual as to whether or not he's a danger to self or others. So, first lesson. There's a lot of disagreement out there, but this is the law. An officer, for example, shall take an individual who's been detained, who is mentally ill and a danger to self or others, to the nearest appropriate inpatient facility, or a facility which has been defined as appropriate by the LMHA. And that's pretty much where they tell you all the facilities that are good to take them to. But you also have EMTALA, which requires that if a person presents on crisis, you got to take them. So when that occurs and they hit any hospital pretty much, okay, and they're in crisis, or it's on an ED, that facility shall accept the individual for up to 12 hours initially. And what I say by up to 12 hours is they've got 12 hours to assess them. And if a doctor lays eyes on them and says, "No, you're perfectly okay, go home," they go home. If not, then the doctor has 48 hours, here's a different clock, from the time they got to the hospital to call a judge like me and say, "Judge, we can't let him go. We need permission to keep him longer." All right? So, let me stop here and tell you another funny story. You know what the worst thing that can happen to a 40-something-year-old man is? A recently retired father. They have nothing better to do than to call you. I mean, it's like I was dating my dad. "What are you doing, Dad?" "I don't know. What are you doing?" "What are you doing, Dad?" "I don't know. What are you doing?" "You hang up." "No, you hang up first." It was that bad. He had nothing better to do than call me. So I'm sitting in trial. We take a break, and let me pause and give you the backdrop of this. We had a young lady who recently divorced her husband. Her husband had gone downstairs and applied to a judge for a mental health warrant, claiming, "My wife is in tears. She is so upset that she divorced me. It was a horrible shock to her. She knows she's made a mistake. I believe she's so emotional she will kill herself this evening. I need intervention." So some judge at that time signs off on a mental health warrant. The deputies go and pick this person up and take her into the hospital. Remember when I said the hospital's got 12 hours? In the 12 hours, a doctor went to her and said, "Are you all right?" She said, "Yeah." Someone says, "Here you were crying." "They're tears of joy." "I'm glad I divorced him. I'm happy. Get me out of here." And they let him go. They let her go, obviously. Well, as you should know, it's actually against the law to attempt to commit somebody to a mental health institute, or even to commit somebody to a mental health institute unless it's appropriately done or under good cause. So fast forward, we're at trial. This guy's, getting prosecuted. I'm in chambers with my dad. He says, what are you doing? So I'm in trial. What kind of case is it? Oh, some guy tried to put his wife in an insane asylum because she divorced him. And there was a pause. And my dad says, there's something wrong with that? My very next phone call was to Mom. Mom, I think Dad's got plans for you. Not for nothing. But there's triggers along the way in the system, and you need to understand that on the civil side, the system really is controlled by the doctors. Despite some of the friction and some of the belief that the courts get involved, we get involved we pretty much authorize treatment, so long as they meet a legal criteria. But the system really is run by the doctors. They have the ultimate say-so. And the code is written to reflect that. Here's why. On the civil side, sometime long ago in the 80s, way back in the 80s, when I had the mullet and an earring, and unfortunately for those of you who are 50, who are here in the 47, you don't have to raise, but unless you're brave, the 47 to 55 range right in there. I just hit 50. That means, sir, you and I went through every bad haircut ever designed. The flock of seagulls, the mullet, the Billy Ray. I can keep going, all right? We went through every nature of clothing, from the blazer on blue jeans, to the Billy Joel, to the white top sneakers, to the blue jeans that went from this wide to this wide to this high. We went through every phase there was in the 80s. And so it seems to me like such a long time ago. I guess it's really not. But in the 80s, the great state of Texas decided that it would deinstitutionalize its mental health treatment. How many of you have watched Girl Interrupted? If you have not, you need to. That's how it used to be. All right? They would lock people away forever in these huge facilities for the mentally ill. And all the treatment and all the provision for treatment and everything was provided in these huge complexes. There's a reason that the San Antonio State Hospital is on 200 acres with only a few buildings left. The tunnels are still there, the buildings are gone. So we deinstitutionalized with the belief, and it made kind of sense, with the belief that why don't we treat the acute individuals at a state hospital under the law, detain them, get them there, and then stabilize them, and then get them out to services where we can pay for services on the outside, continuing outpatient services, whether voluntary, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, great idea. You know what the difference between a pipe dream and a well-laid plan is? Funding. They didn't pay for it. There's nothing out there for the most part, unless you've got some kind of insurance and the very few public beds. So, for example, at the San Antonio State Hospital, I have jurisdiction over 52 counties. Well, not jurisdiction, they bring them up and I hear cases from 52 counties. That's a population of about 4 million plus, 4.2 million, I think somebody told me once. I have 80 acute beds at the San Antonio State Hospital. 80! And that used to be 125 up until about a month ago. We've got 300 beds out there. Most of them are being taken by the competency restoration people. And most of them are being paid for out of our LMHA fund, which was supposed to be for the civil people, not the criminal. So now we have even fewer beds available for our people, and our poor Center for Healthcare Services is struggling to keep the lifeboat afloat. And the San Antonio State Hospital has pretty much said, man, it's a war. I'll help the person who's in front of me, but I can't guarantee I'll have more room tomorrow.
Wasn't it because of a lawsuit?
Yeah, on the criminal side, it's a little bit of that. Some time ago, they went ahead and said, well, you know what? You're going to have to treat all these competency individuals at the same state hospitals anyway. So local mental health fund, I've given you $25, for example, to take care of everybody in your jurisdiction. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, and by the way, now that $25 is also got to include twice as many people for the criminal. And the LMHA said, well, fine, can we get another $25? And the state said, no. Make that $25 stretch. And it's killing us. And it's killing the LMHA. And they're blaming us for going over capacity. That's like telling you, I'm going to give you $1, but I'm going to take 50 cents back, and I want you to go buy me a $1 soda. And if you don't get me a $1 soda, I'm going to fine you $2 for not bringing me a soda. All right? And that's what's occurring. Now, additionally, what's happened is that, remember I told you these people were, that was a good question, by the way. These people were in jail for months at a time. Disability rights, who I love because they have protected more individuals from abuse in the system than anyone else, okay? I am a great advocate of disability rights, even though most judges would run the other way if they hear disability rights coming through. Okay, they're the guys that sue you if you do something bad. They sued the state of Texas on the criminal side and said, look, it's inhumane to keep people waiting months for this competency restoration. You need to get them there. And the judge agreed. And the judge said, you will move all these people to competency restoration in 21 days. Fantastic. But what would reasonable people say? Well, we need to come up with more money for more beds for these people. That's what reasonable people would say. What did the state do? Well, we're just going to crowd them into the same beds we already have, and we're not going to give you any more money for anything else. So now, we had to pay for them, and that was a big heartburn. Now we've got to pay for them even quicker. That's what that lawsuit did. It's a wonderful lawsuit, but it's kind of like a balloon. When you squeeze one end of it, the other end bulges. That's what's happening. All right, so on the criminal side, we go ahead and sign this warrant. We bring them to a hospital. They've got 12 hours. At the 48-hour mark, a doctor has to decide, is this person so ill that he needs to be committed? Now, for you doctors out there, I want you to pay attention to this. Please, please, when you apply for the civil side, you are not applying for an order of protective custody. That is not what you're doing. You are asking for an order of involuntary mental health services. You're saying, dear judge, he is so ill, I need to keep him past 48 hours, and you have to commit him to some form of treatment, whether it be inpatient or outpatient. That's what you're doing. And I set it for a hearing. That's about 3 days or 7 days or 14 days later. I said, all right, bring him to me in 14 days. And then you do a second thing. You'll say, oh, and by the way, judge, he's so ill, we can't let him go in the meantime. We need your permission to keep him until that hearing. That's the order of protective custody. One cannot precede the other. You're asking for an order of involuntary mental health services, and then you're saying, oh, and he's so dangerous, he needs to be kept somewhere. For the most part in San Antonio, here's another thing that happened. We don't have a public facility. Okay? SASH is not our public facility. SASH is the state facility. But you know, growing up, as San Antonio has, with a hospital located a couple miles, actually I know it's 6.2 miles from downtown, all right? Growing up with a hospital 6 point, it was just easier to take them to San Antonio State Hospital. Hence, Bexar County does not have a public acute care bed care system. It only has privates. And these poor privates are getting inundated. So now we're at a point where we have few beds for acute care. We have no place to put these people. They've got to go somewhere when Ernie and these guys come pick them up. They take them to a private hospital. The law says the private hospital's got to take them initially. But what happens when the initially runs out and there's no place to send them? The private hospitals are getting stuck with them. And here's the danger. Every doctor here will tell you from a private hospital that when they don't have room upstairs in their psychiatric facility, they can't let them go. They go to the emergency room, and they stay in that emergency bed. That's my nephew who just drowned, who can't get into that bed. That's your grandfather who just had a heart attack, who can't get into that bed. That's your sister who just cut her hand accidentally with the lawnmower, who can't get into that bed. Because we have no public acute system in San Antonio. And now that the beds are full, we're scrambling. And hopefully, we've got some things in progress, but hopefully within the next 2, 3, or 4, or 5 years, we can resolve that. But damn, for somebody like me that's watching these 8, 10, 12, 14, 92-year-olds come through every day, that's a long time to wait. Do we agree? So I need you guys to speak up whenever you have the opportunity to speak up as to that one point. So you all have filed this thing called an Order of Involuntary Mental Health Services, request for it. I have approved it. I have set it out for so many days. I have agreed with you that this person shall be detained in your hospital. What then happens under the law is that 72 hours later, from the point I signed that order of protective custody, they have the right to a probable cause hearing. Remember that lady I talked about who was married and wound up at the hospital, but the doctor let her go? What if the doctor hadn't let her go? The safety net is 72 hours she would have been before me. On a very informal hearing going, Judge, it's my husband, it's not me. Those are tears of joy, et cetera, et cetera. And at that point, I could discharge her. However, if I, as a judge, could discharge her because she no longer meets that legal criteria of being dangerous. But presumably, I'm at that hearing because a doctor has put in a piece of paper under oath, I, as a doctor and a medical professional, can tell you this person is a danger. And doctors, caseworkers, individuals who help fill out these things, the more detailed, the better, because when they get to me and all I've got is a piece of paper and they're looking at me, telling me, Judge, that was 2 weeks ago. I was off my Zyprexa. I'm better now. I was hearing voices. I'm stable now. I'm ready to go home. I've already called my doctor. I've set up an appointment. Man, that's hard for me to keep somebody. It's hard for me to find that they're a present danger of imminent serious harm. So the more information you can put on there, the better. Good? All right. So you've now got them to the point that we're at the 72-hour meeting. So here's the line. Somebody detains them. Somebody gets them to a hospital. The hospital has to take them for at least 12 hours. At 12 hours, that person has to have been assessed from the time they were detained. From the time they hit the hospital, the doctor's got 48 hours to make this next decision, which is, oh, and by the way, we need to have some involuntary mental health services. Oh, and by the way, we need to have a hearing. 72 hours after that, we have our safety net. Again, built for discharge, not for keeping people. And then 14 days, within the 14 days, we have our commitment hearing. Most people don't get to be committed unless they're really, really ill. About 85 to 90% of the individuals who are detained on an order of protective custody are discharged, as it should be. All right? In fact, I wish we had alternate, less restrictive places to keep these people on OPC so they didn't have to hit the hospital system, because they'll discharge within a few weeks. Unfortunately, we only have the hospital systems to deal with now, so we get them there, and believe it or not, that turns out often enough to build the system of getting them into commitment. And I'm thinking, this person should have been discharged a week ago. So anyway, then we get to commitment. At commitment, I can commit an individual to involuntary mental health services for a period of 90 days or a year, depending on their history. Think about that. I have the power to take someone's freedom away for up to a year, and they haven't even broken the law. And that's where I go back to you and I say, you can't take these things lightly. I truly believe that an individual has every right to be as mentally ill as they want, as long as they're not hurting themselves or anyone else. Because it's pretty hard to look someone in the eye and say, you just lost a year of your life because. And even then, the system is built for release again. At any time during that 90 days or a year, if a doctor believes they're no longer a danger to self or others, they get released. Okay? So now we're at the commitment. Let's talk about one last thing. We here in Bexar County have done something different. Remember that whole thing I talked about with involuntary mental health commitments, the drug court, where you get the doctors together with the caseworkers together with the judge? Well, there's a law that says I can actually commit somebody to an outpatient setting instead of an inpatient setting. And sometimes I get a lot of doctors that don't want to discharge somebody because they're not quite ready, but if there was somewhere else to discharge them to, they would. It's called the least restrictive alternative. And I look at this outpatient, and by the way, that criteria is different. That criteria is this. Are you ill? Can you live safely in the community without treatment? Because you can be ill. If you can live safely in the community without treatment, you don't need me. Are you ill? Can you live safely in the community without treatment? And have you proven that you can't comply with treatment either because of your illness or some history? That's different than dangerousness, right? So we put these people on outpatient, and here's what we've done. We have targeted, and I believe that not everyone should be on outpatient. But if you're an individual who consistently comes out of a hospital, gets arrested, comes out of a hospital, goes to jail, comes out of a hospital, tries to commit suicide, comes out of a hospital, sees the devil in the wall 5 days later. Every single time. If you're in that category of individuals who's coming back over and over and over again, we need to do something more for you. Judges can't just sign orders and say, I'm done. We need to be responsible for helping these people get the services they deserve, even if they can't access them, and because they can't access them. So we place them on this outpatient order. And the order goes for the remainder of the original order, or up to 90 days again. And we wrap a team around them. And you remember that whole protocol we talked about in the drug court? We're doing exactly that with the mentally ill, the seriously mentally ill. And only the ones who can't do it on their own, and only the ones who wind up getting in danger over and over again, because we don't want to abuse this program. All right? And here's what we've learned. The people that we've targeted, we studied 100. This amazed me when I heard it. We only studied 100 of the people we had done for a year before, during, and after. They accounted for 67,000 lifetime bed days. You know how sick you have to be to account for 100 people to account for 67,000 lifetime bed days? Amazing. And when you broke down the numbers, you know what their average utilization in a hospital was every year? Average. So that means a lot of them had more, some of them had less. They averaged 88 bed days a year. 88 bed days a year, almost more than a third of their time away from freedom. I'm wrapping it up right now. All right, here's what we did. That same number I told you, that 70-80% that works on these therapeutic courts, guess what? It works here. So these people who had consistently averaged 88 bed days a year over and over and over and over again, we studied 100 of these people. Wow. In the year of involuntary outpatient, with the judge saying, you better do this, we hug, we scold, we cry, we yell, we do whatever it takes to get them through the next week. In the year of that outpatient program, we went from 88 bed days to about 42 bed days a year. A 50% reduction. Here's the amazing part. After we got out of their lives and we did finally forced services around them and got them housing and got them to understand their medications, even though they didn't want to, you know what their bed day average was after we were out of their lives? 32. That's amazing. You add a number to that, it turns out to be about $3 million worth of services that they otherwise would have been accessing. It's pretty good, right? Because when we work together to make a difference for these people, we can, despite all the hurdles in front of us. Here's the last thing I'm going to tell you. I have learned this also. Be patient. It's not their choice. It could be you. Here's the last thing. And forgive me for using a colloquial joke, but it really proves the point. So there's this guy at the San Antonio State Hospital, and he's driving out. He's a doctor. And he gets a flat. And he goes to change his tire, and when he goes to put the tire back on, he can't find the little lug nuts. There's like 4 of those little screws that hold the tire. And one of the patients was watching him from behind the fence. And he says, hey, dude. He says, what? He says, why don't you get 1 lug nut off each tire? That way you've got 3 on each tire, and you can at least make it home. And the doctor turns around and says, man, how'd such a smart guy like you make it to a place like this? And he says, hey, I might be crazy, but I'm not stupid. That's the point. Just because they're ill doesn't mean they're stupid. Some of them are even far more brilliant than most people I know. They're everyday people. They're your mother, your sister, your brother, your doctor, your next door neighbor. That's my phone. I gotta go. All right, bye.